I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today ought to be a pretty good one because the new Ford Focus ST has now arrived into the Australian market. And what better way to suss out just how good this new ST is than put it straight into a comparison with the current fan favourite among hot hatches, the Hyundai i30N. But this isn't just any i30N, this is the new model year 2020 version, which looks the same outside, but under the skin it gets the fastbacks, revised suspension and steering rack that should make it even better to drive and a little bit more comfortable around town. But the i30 now has to compete against a hot hatch with significant heritage and lineage behind it, and that is the new Ford Focus ST. Under the bonnet, the engine upgrades to the 2.3 litre EcoBoost turbo that was previously used in the Focus RS. Ford have now cancelled the Focus RS, so this sits at the top of the tree of the Ford hot hatch lineup, so it needs to be good. Of course, the fastest way to figure out which of these hot hatches is best is to take them both out onto some really great roads. And that's what we're going to do first before returning to the interiors and the practicality, which are very important in a hot hatch in this day and age. But before we get started, make sure to hit subscribe down below and the notification bell to help us on our mission of 50k and beyond. It makes a big difference. All right, let's hit the road. Focus first. So what is the Focus ST like to drive? And especially here in the company of a hot hatch which is quickly driven straight to the center of this segment as a real fan favorite, the Hyundai i30N. Well, the good news is that in many ways the Focus ST drives like a bigger, more grown-up version of the Fiesta ST, which we reviewed recently and you can watch up here. And that was a car we were really positive about because it brings back some of these old school virtues to the kind of hot super mini segment, in that the Fiesta ST really dances while also feeling quite strong in the engine department. Thankfully, Ford Performance decided not to throw out that good stuff when making this larger vehicle, the Focus ST. But basically, not to give too much away too soon, I think what they've been able to do is strike a really nice balance between the refinement of cars like the Golf GTI and a bit more rawness and just strong go-fast ability of vehicles like the i30N. But first, let's talk about what's happening under the bonnet of the Focus ST, because what we have here is Ford's 2.3 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol. Now this engine does service currently in the Mustang 4-cylinder, but also in the outgoing Focus RS, and the ST has been upgraded to this mill. That's especially important in light of Ford's decision to ditch the RS going forward. Unfortunately, they're just not able to make that car work with Europe's restrictive emissions requirements now. So the ST is top dog from here on out. So the engine in this vehicle produces 206 kilowatts of power and 420 Newton meters of torque, which is a massive increase in torque over the outgoing ST. And that's kind of the dominant character of this engine, is no matter what gear you're in, it pulls hard. Change lanes on the freeway, drop down to 5th and stab the throttle, and you just feel this incessant pull from the front axle. Not in a badly torqued steering way, just that you can tell there's an absolutely massive amount of twist being directed through the front axle. Thankfully, it's assisted by an electronically controlled, mechanically locking diff, which means it's actually able to put that power down in most circumstances. And it makes the Focus really easy to drive on a winding country road like this one. The engine also sounds pretty good if we listen. It's got a slightly more bassy, mean tone than the Hyundai. And Ford have been very clever because they have listened to customers who say that they love the delightful sounds of the Hyundai, and they've replicated some of those in the Focus. You know, it has a nice crackle and pop demeanor if you go searching for it. It's certainly not as extroverted as the i30, but I reckon there's enough there to please the ear. The other key component of the drivetrain is, of course, the 6-speed manual gearbox, Now, for the first time, the ST in Australia will also be available with a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic, and Ford does expect the auto to eventually become the volume seller in terms of STs here in Australia, but initially the manual is going to be the more popular gearbox. And I rejoice in that because it's a lovely manual. Ford make a really good manual. The Fiesta is manual only, and the gearbox feels similar, not the same, but generally just really lovely. Short throw, rifle bolt action, and the clutch is just perfectly weighted. It's really predictable. The friction point is about halfway through the travel. It just feels bang on, and I think this is a really easy car for someone to pick up, even if you're not a hugely confident manual driver. Just that all the control surfaces have a really nice weighting to them, and the manual's pretty easy. Now, the ride and handling of the Focus is good. I don't love the steering, but it's at least very direct and it's quick. It's just that the weighting can feel a little artificial at times, but the body control is exceptional. The Focus sits nice and flat in the corners, and it's not afraid to use its rear end to help out its front end either. In fact, there's considerable rear end float in terms of lift off oversteer, and also when you just dab the brakes to help tuck the front end in a little bit, you feel this lovely dance at the rear end. It really works with you. However, that brings me on to the Focus ST's biggest flaw, and that's the fact that Ford Performance don't put an individual drive mode into this car, and they don't want to. Their philosophy is that they've got the drive modes right, and any individual mode is wrong, and that view, in fact, is wrong. Because in Australia, we really need an individual drive mode to combine the more comfortable and compliant normal suspension mode with sportier engine response, the good exhaust sound that you only get in sport mode, and the stronger response of the LSD. Unfortunately, you can't customize that. So you can either run in normal mode, which is a little bit remote but better riding, or sport, which is borderline too stiff for Australian roads, as I'm demonstrating now, vibrating around, but you get the better response from the LSD, the better throttle response, and the tastier sound from the exhaust. So it's a real catch-22, and you find yourself shuffling between drive modes, whereas the i30 really lets you set it up properly. So it's certainly bearable in sport mode. I just wish they hadn't made that strategic choice with the Focus. They need to introduce an individual drive mode. Other things that are negative about the Focus include the fact that it's definitely louder on coarse chip, and we have a lot of that in Australia. It's louder at speed than the i30, which is a real surprise. And while it does have a good noise, it's certainly not as extroverted as the i30, but as a package, as a lovely sophisticated driver's car in this segment, there's much to like here in the Focus ST. Well, it's great to be jumping back into a Hyundai i30N, which is certainly one of the most interesting additions to the hot hatch landscape in the last decade. While we know that the Focus ST is a good car in general, you know, there's never really a letdown. The i30N is so great as a concept because it's actually a fresh hot hatch for this segment. As a first go, we've credited it time and time again with being a really cracking start for Hyundai in terms of getting into this part of the market. But while the i30N is a really good first crack at a serious hot hatch, that doesn't necessarily make it better than other entrants in this segment and new cars, brand new cars like the 2020 Focus ST. And of course, Hyundai know that they can't rest on their laurels, which is why they've given the i30 hatch, or the i30N hatch I should say, some of the improvements that they dialed into the newer fastback shape. And those improvements to the fastback address some of the biggest problems that we had with the i30N hatch at launch, namely that the front end was too stiff, there was actually not enough roll to help out the car, and that the rear end was too inert. And all of those things have received significant tweaks. It's still not perfect, but the i30N 2020 version is a significant improvement over the original form of this car. And more than anything, it's simply impressive to see Hyundai responding to reasoned feedback so quickly. We'll come back to that. First, what hasn't changed? The 2-litre turbo 4-cylinder under the bonnet of the i30N. It's an engine that produces 202 kilowatts of power and 353 newton meters of torque, and it's a development of an engine that was already on the shelf at Hyundai. That being said, it's a good little engine. It sounds cool, shift down a few gears. A little bit more buzzy, a little bit higher frequency than the Focus, less bassy, less muscular, but of course, one of the i30N's biggest advantages is just the noises that emanate from those dual exhausts. Hyundai realized there was clearly a market here for a very extroverted competitor, and they gave the i30N the most brilliant noise in this segment, which is that it just crackles and pops its way down the road if you want it to. You can go for a quiet exhaust, but when it sounds as luscious as it does, I don't know why you'd bother. And out of the two cars here, there's no doubt that the i30N makes the best exhaust sound, even if the engine note is probably a little better in the Focus. You can also hear the i30N shenanigans a little better than you can in the Focus because it's a bit quieter in the cabin, which is a surprise because this isn't really a very quiet car, nor very refined. It's just that the Focus is especially noisy in the cabin. However, where the engine suffers is here in the top end, where it just feels a little bit torqueless compared to the Focus. Don't get me wrong, this is still a quick car, it's still fairly muscular, but just Ford have really thrown the kitchen sink at the engine of the Focus ST, and you can really tell. By contrast, the i30, you just need to roll it along a little bit more, keep it in lower gears, but the gearing isn't quite as good as it is in the Focus. You run out of second a little bit too quickly, bit of a gap between second and third. Yeah, thankfully the action of the gear shift is absolutely lovely. I love the shifter on the i30N, feels really good in the hand, the nicer of the two. And although the throw is perhaps a touch longer in the Hyundai, it's still pretty short, feels really good in terms of shifting through the 6 gears. What doesn't feel quite as good in this set is the clutch. I think the Ford has just really nailed a natural clutch feel, take up points where you expect, and the anti-stall function, which both cars have, is just more subtle in the Ford. And a lot of people, including 3 members of our staff, report that the i30N is just harder to take off smoothly from a start because of that anti-stall feature. But we are splitting hairs here because both of these manual gearboxes are really nice. Now Hyundai do have a dual clutch automatic almost ready for the i30N. We've been waiting on that for a couple of years now, and it'll be interesting to compare these cars with their 2 dual clutch automatic gearboxes later. But for now, the manuals are really what have my heart, and I'd be happy driving either of these cars every day in that sense. But let's get onto the all-important part of a hot hatch, and that really is the handling, because both of these cars are fast enough. How they go around corners is more important to me. Now, I don't love the steering in either car, but it's just a little bit more remote, I would say, in the i30, perhaps a little bit heavier by default, but at least you can customize an individual drive mode in this car to give it better suspension or more comfortable suspension on Australian back roads, but tune up the sports mode for the engine, the exhaust, the LSD, and the stability control. But none of the steering settings feel ultimately that natural to me. Similarly, the i30 just hesitates a little bit more before turn-in compared to the Ford, which really feels quite electric in your hands. But a big improvement has been made by Hyundai to the sort of mid-corner dynamics of the car. It's now much less inert. It is willing to move its rear end around on public roads at normal speeds, which used to only be possible on the track in the original form. And that's largely just because of a little softening at the front end, which really changes everything. And it's much better. Simple fact though is that the Ford is even more willing to dance and feels even more natural at being sort of an agile hot hatch. The i30N is ultimately extremely planted, and that makes it feel very, very secure on the road and very grippy. And I think if this is your first hot hatch, the i30N is absolutely the way to go. But if you're looking for more of a deep cuts kind of track in the continuum of hot hatches, the Focus ST is the way, because it doesn't feel quite so secure. It does feel a little bit more out there, a bit more on edge, with plateaus for drivers to jump onto and then reach for the next one. Whereas the i30N, it's not one-dimensional, or at least it's not one-dimensional anymore, which is great, but it just feels really, really secure all the time. One thing I will say though is that the suspension on the i30N is a lot more comfortable in normal mode. Their body control is less perfect in normal, but you can dial it up as you go, but then you start getting more and more bouncy ride features. But I do like it in normal with everything else apart from steering turned up to sport, and this is the only car with that individual drive mode configuration that gives the power to the people to work out what's best for them on their own roads, and Ford simply denies you that. Part of the charm of the Focus is here in the interior, which just feels really resolved and nicely put together and elevated a little bit beyond the Hyundai. But you would expect that because, as I mentioned, it's 4 or 5 grand more expensive on the road. So you are expecting, a little bit more of a luxurious experience in this hot hatch, maybe a bit closer to the Golf GTI end of the continuum. And this car is a bit cheaper than that Volkswagen, but it doesn't feel much cheaper inside. That starts with these lovely Recaro seats. So they're really supportive, they're cloth and heated and manually adjustable. And unlike the Hyundai, you can't option in leather, you can't option in electric adjustment. So you either like these seats or you don't. They work for me because I like cloth seats. The driving position to me feels good. But if you're going to have multiple drivers, adjusting them is going to get a little bit annoying over time with the manual adjustment. But no one's going to complain about this steering wheel, which looks nice. It's got white stitching, perforation, feels good, a little squidgy in the hand. I think the bigger hub is not quite as attractive as in the Hyundai, but that's really slim pickings. And in terms of the drive mode select, we do have dedicated buttons. They're a bit less obvious, but we don't have one-touch control for stuff like the ESC or the rev matching functions in the Hyundai, and that's a bit of a shame. Looking forward at the gauges, we have a better digital screen here in the Ford because we can see more options, things like your audio and your navigation, but the actual analog component of the dials is less attractive, I think, in the Ford, but still perfectly fine. Casting our eyes across to the infotainment, we have Ford's floating touchscreen here with Sync 3 software. It's pretty easy to use, it's reasonably snappy. And we have wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, just like in the Hyundai. Neither car has wireless smartphone integration, which is a bit of a shame, and we look forward to seeing that roll out on more cars. However, we do have an absolutely cracking Bang & Olufsen B&O stereo here in the Focus, which sounds terrific. We have decent practicality, wireless phone charging, big cup holders that are customizable, and a good armrest between the seats with storage space. However, no physical handbrake, bit of a shame on a hot hatch because they do come in handy, but that gives you a bit more storage. However, one area where the Ford is really great is perceived quality because we have lots of soft touch materials, just in more places than you find them in the Hyundai, including here where your leg rests, which is nice on a long trip. So up front, I do think it's a little nicer, but of course you're paying for the privilege. Next up, the back seat. Well, in the standard Focus, we've continually found that it's quite a practical hatchback in terms of rear seat space, and so it goes for the ST. So with this seat in my driving position, I have good legroom, another couple of inches, so it's more practical than the Hyundai in that way. And toe room is also not a problem, so it is going to be more comfortable for those in the back as long as they're not too tall, because I have only a skerrick of headroom. I mentioned we do have the pano roof, so if you didn't get that, you'd have a bit more headroom as well. You could get 3 people across a bit easier because there's virtually no hump in the floor, but still no air vents, just like the Hyundai. And we revert to hard touch materials in the back. So it's a bit give and take with these cars. Like the i30, we have 2 cup holders here in a fold down armrest, and the seat itself is reasonably comfortable. So it's more spacious here in the back of the Ford, but in most other facets, it's pretty similar. What isn't similar though is the boot on the Focus. Now, love the rear end design of this car. Not sure it's a really good match for the front end. They kind of look like they were designed by 2 different teams in my opinion, but open up this tailgate and there's not a huge amount of space. So that's about 100 litres down on the Hyundai, and you can tell that once the doors open. It's not as deep, it doesn't go back as far, but you can still get some bags in there without a problem. But of course, if you're gonna be after a practical performance car, you'd probably go for something a bit bigger, but a decent sized boot is absolutely a consideration in a hot hatch. And if that's the priority, the Hyundai is going to give you a bit more space. Meanwhile, here in the Hyundai i30N, the interior is probably a little bit less plush, but the money has been spent on the things that count. And that starts with the seats, which I reckon are a little bit beefier than the Recaros in the Focus, even though these are Hyundai's own creation. They're not branded with, you know, a label like Recaro, but they are a really nice seat. Here in the base grade i30N, because this car is available in multiple specifications, unlike the all-in Focus ST, we have cloth seats with really nice attractive performance blue stitching, but they just hold you in really well, and the seating position is good even though these seats are manually adjustable. If you splash out extra on the luxury pack, you get a mixture of leather and a suede-like material with electric adjustment for the driver. Now interestingly, the electrically adjustable seats don't go quite as low because there has to be somewhere for the motor to be positioned, but you do get stuff like under-thigh angle adjustment if you go for that option. Meanwhile, most of the other components in the interior are the same no matter if you go for base or luxury, including this steering wheel, which is really shapely. It's not particularly reminiscent of the standard i30 steering wheel because we've got this little hub, we have these banks of shortcut keys and these unmissable performance blue shortcut buttons. The left one's taking you to the more benign drive modes and the right one operating the N mode and N custom, which we talked about when taking this car for a drive. Beyond that, the dials are analog, but really crisp and clear. They look really nice, like a kind of expensive watch face, in my opinion. Moving over here, the infotainment is done through this touchscreen, which, you know, uses Hyundai's standard software, which is very, very easy to use, even if it doesn't look especially, I suppose, premium in terms of graphics. What we do have is great shortcut keys to make it easy to operate on the move, though in one thing, the conversion has not relocated the volume knob to the right-hand side. Of course, we have a shortcut for that on the steering wheel. The climate controls are really easy to see as well, and the practicality in the car is good, with a big tray ahead of the shifter, 2 decent sized cup holders, and door bins that will fit a water bottle. However, material quality isn't all that great in the i30N. They have spent that money on the mechanical bits, which is good, but you know, we have a hard touch piece here, but we have soft touch on the top of the dash and on the doors. But it is a little hard down here where your leg naturally rests if you have long legs like me. But on the whole, I would say the Hyundai is quite nice up front. What about in the back? Well, sitting behind my own driving position, you'll find that the i30N does have a pretty usable back seat, but not a massive one. So for myself at 6 foot, headroom is no problem. This car doesn't have a sunroof, although one is optional, but legroom's an issue. I've got just half an inch or so behind my own driving position, and toe room is really, really tight, and that's because these seats are big. So the i30N really is all about those up front. You can use the back seat as an occasional area for friends or cargo. However, there's no air vents, but in a nice touch, the materials actually stay soft on the doors back here, which is quite rare in this segment. You do get a flip down armrest with cup holders and an extra bottle holder in the door. So hey, as back seats go, it's perfectly usable. What about the boot? Let's head around there now. And this is where we see the i30N's fairly attractive rear end, in my opinion. It looks good, it looks focused. The diffuser is perhaps a little bit overdone, but those 2 meaty exhaust pipes look good in my opinion, as does the double deck spoiler with the all-important triangular light. Hey, I like it. Manual tailgate, of course, opening up to reveal a 381 litre boot, which is quite practical. We do have the strut brace fitted here in the car, though you can remove that if you really want a flat load bay, but of course that's not really what the i30N is all about. But the boot is deep, definitely enough room for a couple of suitcases, and nice and easy to close that hatch. So on the whole, quite practical, not premium, but definitely nice enough. So that brings us to the need for a verdict in this comparison of the 2020 i30N and the new 2020 Focus ST. A word on the i30N. I really like this car. I've liked it since launch. It's a really fun, loud, extroverted hot hatch. But even better is Hyundai responding to feedback and improving it in the areas where it was lacking at launch, namely in terms of its suspension and its cornering dynamics, which are of course an interrelated idea. It's now even better to drive while still retaining those hallmark features that we've loved from day dot. And there's no taking away from the i30N that this is a brilliant first exercise as a hot hatch. I really, really love it. However, I think the agility factor that comes into the Ford Focus ST is even more important. This is a hot hatch that integrates really the best of that refinement and comfort and luxury of something like a Volkswagen Golf GTI with the genuine desire to rotate in corners, both in terms of its easy kind of alacrity in turn in, and then also it's just absolute dancing tendencies through the rear end. It just makes it feel absolutely alive. And as I mentioned while driving, I reckon if you're looking for your first hot hatch, the Hyundai i30N makes a tremendous amount of sense because it ticks virtually every box on the list. But if you are looking for that deeper cut, that third album that really gets into, you know, the depth of what a hot hatch can and should be, that's where something like the Ford Focus ST starts making a lot of sense, because it teaches you the upper levels of hot hatch driving in what is a really kind of spacious, practical and upmarket package for the money. In terms of whether I'd buy one of these in manual or auto, I mean, the Hyundai's auto is still coming, the Focus auto is already here. Well, it's up to you. But while there's still manual hot hatches around, these are two very good examples. Now, let me know what you think about this comparison down below. Should the i30N win? Should the Focus ST? Are you gonna buy one of these cars? Tell me everything that's on your mind. And while you're down there, make sure to hit subscribe. Help us on our way to 50K and beyond. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.